Thank you. Well, thank you and welcome. Thanks for selecting our session as the one that you wanted to attend. As you know, its title is Up, Out, or What? And what we're really talking about there is how can you have a successful and fulfilling career? So Frederick Herzberg, a noted psychologist, suggested that having a successful, fulfilling career is more about just making money. And that, in fact, people aren't really motivated by making money. They're motivated by bigger questions like, how do I keep learning and growing? How do I contribute in a significant way? How do I get valued for my achievements? How do I contribute to the growth and development of other people? Those are the profounder questions that lead you to the next question, which is back to how do you have a successful, fulfilling career? It's really about knowing yourself and what do you want to be known for. So that's really the bigger question that we want to have a conversation with you about today. Try and give you some thought-provoking ideas, but also share our perspectives on how to develop and execute a strategy to help you reach your goals. We got a lot of wonderful questions from you, so we wanted to really appreciate and thank you in advance for that. And we're going to do our best to answer as many as we can, but we wanted to apologize in advance if we don't get to all of your questions. We're going to use sort of a talk show format in the interest of keeping this lively and interactive. So Eric and I are going to trade off asking each other the questions that you submitted, but we would love you to interrupt us as much as you possibly can, and we'll be throwing a few questions out to you as well. And we also wanted to note that we have a resource that we'll leave you with at the end of the session, which just summarizes some of the books and articles that we refer to and some of the tools that we refer to during that conversation. So with that, I think we'll kick it off and start with the first question. The first question is in the category of know yourself, which is, again, back to sort of one of the key fundamentals. So here we go. I have 20 years of experience, but I'm challenged to find a fit. I'm often told I'm overqualified. How can I find my niche at this stage of my career? Eric.
Great, and before I answer that, let me also just say what a pleasure it is to be here and how delighted I am to be part of this event, and it's a real honor to be part of a Haas network event. So really happy to be with you all. And I want to reiterate what Jeanie said, which was chime in. We really were envisioning this as kind of Oprah meets The Tonight Show or something like that. So just chime in as much as you can. To this question about, what was the question again?
The question was, as you all probably heard it, it was sort of a multifaceted question, as a lot of these are. So it was about your challenge to find a fit, your niche after 20 years in business.
Yeah,
plus
people saying you are
overqualified.
Overqualified. Yeah, so how many of you have gotten that word, overqualified, at some point? So what does that really actually mean? Anyone? You're old. What else? You're setting your bar low. You're too expensive. That kind of goes with old sometimes, right? What else? You know too much and you might have an attitude, contrary to what your dean said earlier today, right? There were some other hands in the back there. One more, yeah.
You're likely to leave when you find a better position.
Yeah, exactly. So what it really means is we're scared of you, or you're going to be a problem, and in all of these different ways. And it's kind of a smokescreen for all of those, or we don't really want to tell you why, and so we're just going to say that, right? So I think but here's my answer to that question. If you are getting that feedback a lot, I think there's two critical things to do. One is do invest, as Jeanie framed our whole meeting today, do invest time and energy into making sure you really get to know yourself well. What I mean by that is not just what could I do, what do I have the potential, what job could I maybe get, but really what do I love to do, what's my potential, and more granular, like what kind of environment do I like to be in? Do I like to be in an environment where there's lots of people around me chattering all the time? Do I like to be solo? Do I like to be part of a larger organization with clearer structure? Or do I like to be part of something that's faster moving? So the more granular and specific you can be about who you are, the more attractive that you will be and the better positioned that you are for the other side of the equation, which is you have to put an equal amount of time and energy into getting to know the marketplace. So you have to know what's out there for someone like you, and that takes a lot of conversations with people. It takes a lot of getting out and talking to people, and it takes, if there's a particular position that you're applying for, it takes going and learning about the company and learning about the job. You need to be the person to decide first if the job is a match for you, not the person who's interviewing you. If you feel like it is, then you will come across as anything but overqualified. I
think that to Eric's point, it's really important to know what your skill set is. And one thing I heard a few of you say is that there's some sense of fit and a question of fit on the side of the people interviewing you, and there may be a question of confidence, which is maybe why you're going for a job that might be a level below. One of the things that can really help address both of those obstacles is to do that honest inventory and look at your accomplishments. And if you really kind of make a list of all of your accomplishments, you're going to actually become emboldened by the successes that you've had. The other great thing to do is to ask people who know you well how they would describe you and what they would say are your strong leading characteristics. The more you can identify those clearly for yourself, the more easily you're actually going to find that sweet spot that is going to be a better match potentially for your skills rather than maybe that job that's a step below. But it really is an opportunity to challenge yourself, both in how you think about yourself and your skills and how you think about yourself in terms of what you can achieve and putting a confident foot forward. And it's particularly, I think, challenging when you haven't been out in the market for a while, talking with people or interviewing. I mean, that's usually when you see that sort of downshift. It's sort of, haven't done this before. So again, use your sort of network of friends and colleagues as practice before you engage in more serious interview type conversations.
Yeah, great. Next question. When choosing between two job opportunities, what are the key factors that result in long-term career satisfaction?
You're going to all start to see a theme here, but let me answer this question and then I'll throw that question back out to you. But this question actually reminds me of a senior executive who recently had the very fortuitous opportunity of having 4 job offers. So the good news is this happened about 2 months ago, so the market is heating up. Most of them were in technology, so I'll qualify that there.
The technology market is heating up.
The technology market is heating up. But her offers were varied. So she had an offer with a big corporate entity, strong brand name, 24/7 environment, knew she was going to be working like crazy. She had another offer with a mid-sized company that was probably going to have a slightly slower pace, where she really related well to the boss that she might have, and that had no commute. And then she had a third opportunity for another company that was, again, larger, had a lot of brand sizzle as well, but had a long commute, but would be sort of a great name that she would have on her resume. So what she needed to do in that scenario, as you're listening to it, was to step back and say, what's the one single thing that's most important to me? And she took stock of her personal objectives over the next 5 years, as well as her professional. And it really forced her to accept that she wanted more life balance than she had had before. But at the same time, she felt the pull of that strong brand name. So she compromised, and she went with the opportunity that was 24/7 but was local. So she rationalized that that was going to be the best solution for her. And in fact, because she went through that process, she's going to own that decision. And that's a really big, important part of being satisfied in your work, is to feel like no one made this decision for you. She had choices, and she could really own it. I don't know if any of you have had similar experiences to that kind of choice, or just sort of that dilemma that you might want to share as additional perspectives on how to navigate that kind of challenge.
I'll share
Actually, can you start from the beginning again? And my apologies for asking you to do that, but I forgot. We are, because this is being recorded, we want to try to make sure, if you do raise your hand, make sure you've got the mic in your hand before you start talking. Thank you.
Sure, just a comment I wanted to share with everyone, but sometimes opportunities come up that are really too good to pass on, even if it's not a good fit for you in the short term, or you don't even see clarity in the long run, but it's either the name of the company, the brand that's associated, just the exceptional opportunity at a particular time, and how to navigate through it, to sort of is that a short-term decision that you can take and then eventually figure out the longer-term plan, but just the appeal is so strong that it almost overrides all other considerations.
Yeah, thank you. It's a great question. Do you want to take that?
Yeah, I will. So I think what that question leads to is probably the hardest thing for you to do, which is to look at the things that matter to you and rank them and make yourself choose the one single thing or the top two that are most important. So you mentioned two things, and you also said too good to pass up. So what I'm inferring from what you just said is that a brand name company is really important to you, and the content of the work is really compelling. And that the other things are nice, but that those are the two things that really mean the most to you. So in fact, that's probably, if that is true, that's probably leading you to the choice to move in that direction. And if that's true, it's also sort of taking care of some of those other things, which is maybe other balance, environment, location, things like that. The important thing is, as you're making the decision, again, to acknowledge what you are choosing and what you're not choosing, because that will lead you to that moment when you're in the office at 2 a.m. to recognize that I chose this, here's why I chose it, and it's okay for now. But in the long term, maybe I'm going to factor this in to my next choice 2 years down the road. So that would be my response to that. We had another question that sort of...
Yes, I think there's a follow-up to that one. Oh, big company, small company.
Yeah, so that's another really good question. Again, you probably are, as you hear that question, you've already probably sorted yourself into one of those two categories. Some of you are more chameleon-like, and you can exist happily in both. But so the answer is, from my perspective, it depends.
It depends.
It depends on you. It depends what your previous experience has been and where you've been successful and or not. So let's say you're just starting your career. You can look at your academic experience. Big school, small school. What's that been like for you? How are you in groups? How are you one-on-one? What do you seem to, what kinds of environments do you seem to pick or gravitate to? Where do you find yourself really contributing, and where do you find yourself sort of being a wallflower? So that kind of assessment you can carry forward throughout your life, and then you can look out to the companies themselves and know that you can group big companies. They're typically more process-driven, they're more hierarchical, they tend to be more slow-moving. And small companies are more nimble, they're faster paced, they're more wear many hats, they're more 24/7. And you can make those assessments, but it still depends, because sometimes a big company has a small company profile, and sometimes a small company has a big company profile. So it's important to do both of those assessments as you look at that.
And just to expand on that, I mean, I'm working with a client at a big company right now, and he just hired somebody without having a job description, without knowing what the position was going to be, just saw talent and wanted to grab it. And then that's the kind of culture that he's trying to create, and I think that they're trying to create. And it's a big company, so don't assume. And this is where it comes back to: are you really investing the time to gather intelligence about this specific opportunity, and talk to some people inside, find out what's really going on. You can't make assumptions until you've really been inside a little bit.
Sort of on a similar note, the next question kind of moves just in, shifts the theme a little bit. And this is the grass is greener question, which is probably an experience everybody has at some point, at least once over the course of their career, maybe many times. How do you balance that grass is greener mentality with practical realities of wanting to see your investment in time, blood, sweat, and tears pay off?
Yeah, and what I love about that question is it does acknowledge the very human tendency to always assume that something else that you don't really know about is going to be better than the sort of questionable thing that you do know all about. They say there's a metaphor that the closer you get to something, the more you see the cracks in it. And I think that's really true. I'm sure you've all experienced that in the workplace as well. My answer to that is, and this is another theme, again, this is a theme that you're going to be hearing. A lot of it is about, some of it is about how well do you know yourself, but a lot of it is about, are you really doing a thoroughgoing job of gathering intelligence about that other opportunity? You know, if you're having the grass is greener feeling, it's usually about something specific, some particular position or a company. It's not like a general thing. So what I would suggest is go on LinkedIn, find anybody that you know that has a connection to that company or that opportunity. Call them, sit down with them, get introduced to them, have coffee. It's not a coffee where you're asking them for a job. It's a coffee where you are asking them, you want to learn. And some of this stuff is basic, and you've heard this before. But talking to people is, I think, the single best source of intelligence about an opportunity. The more information that you have, the better, the more realistic of a decision that you can make. And then you have to combine that with, do I really know what I want? You know, you have to be very self-honest about that. Do I really know what I'm looking for at this stage in my career? Because it may be very different. So before we started here today, somebody asked me, you know, I feel sort of like I'm in the doldrums a little bit right now. And 5 years ago, I knew where I was. I knew where I was headed. I had all this energy for that. And now I feel like, you know, I'm not sure. And I think some of this ties to life cycles. Human beings go through different phases in their lives where, you know, what made sense for you, who you were 5 years ago, is not the same person you are today. So you have to be willing to keep coming back and looking at yourself again, and, you know, taking those assessments and buying what color is your parachute, or, you know, finding a career advisor or something like that. You know, talk to your partner or whoever and learn more about yourself. So that, I think that would be my answer.
And my only add to that would be to be aware of your internal triggers. And I guess by that I mean, for example, a senior scientist I know is always prompted to have that grass is greener look or feeling when there's either uncertainty in her company and she's not sure what direction it's going to go in and how stable it is, or something happens and she's done a bit of hard work but she doesn't feel valued. It's almost like a switch that goes off. One of those two things happens, the resume comes out, and she starts looking around. What else is out there? So it is important to be aware of the internal triggers that you may have when you experience that grass is greener. Because if you are going to make some sort of change, you want to make sure that you're sort of scientific about it, and you're not letting any of these other variables that may follow you around to the next position creep in and interfere with your decision.
Great. I just, maybe this is a good moment to just throw it out there and ask, is there a niggling question that's come up for one of you and you're ready to ask it? Okay.
Okay.
So my situation is thank you. I've been in a number of sort of informal leadership roles where I've sort of led teams, but it doesn't show up in an org chart, right? And then there was one instance where I was actually sort of running an office because the person in the org chart who ostensibly ran the org worked off-site. And so I sort of became the de facto person who sort of ran the org.
Right.
On paper, I still look like an individual contributor, and I'm sort of trying to, you know, jump the gap there to try and, you know, transition into management roles, and it's been a challenge. So what are your thoughts on that? I mean, and again, having been in the industry for, you know, approaching 20 years.
Yeah. My first thought on that is, this is about your brand. This is not about what you already know how to do. This is about your brand. And when I say brand, I'm using it in the exact same way that Dean Lyons was using it in the kickoff this morning. You have a brand. That is how the world perceives you, how all the people around you perceive you. And you have the ability to decide what you want that brand to be and then to communicate that brand out. And I think that you have the skills already to be in a leadership position, but what it sounds like is you don't have the brand. And so what you have is, to my mind, a strategic communication issue. You have to decide how you want people to see you, and then how are you going to talk about the experiences that you've had in a way that people will really get that you are a leader, that you've already done this. It's not about you looking for an opportunity. It's about this is already who you are. So I would look at it as a communication challenge. And if you want to talk afterwards, we can talk more about details of how you would do that. But I think you fundamentally have a branding issue.
And I would just add to that so if you think about one of the big opportunities to say who you are, it's your resume. So on your resume, you have a list of achievements, and that's an opportunity for you to actually tactically say, led this team to accomplish X, collaborated with X and Y, oversaw Z. So you have an opportunity to reposition the work that you're doing to more accurately reflect your role, because you do really want to speak to your role. So as Eric was saying, in conversation, talking to people about the initiatives that you led, even as this individual contributor. And on your resume, there's a real opportunity to make it clear what your accomplishment was in more of a leadership capacity, even though it may not look consistent with your title. And that's a great place to respond if some interviewer asks you about that.
Yeah, and don't you get hung up on what your past titles have been. Because the reality is, when somebody's looking at you as a prospect for a new position, they want to know what you can do. I mean, yeah, they'll look at your titles, but what they really want to know is, can you do this? And if you can prove that you can, then you've got it. So the inside part of this, the mindset part of this is, you need to start thinking of yourself already as a manager. That's who you are now.
Yes.
Eric, some of the themes that you're talking about is knowing yourself better. And you mentioned briefly this issue of assessments.
Yeah.
There are plenty of assessment tools out there. How do you pick which one to use? How do you know?
It's crazy.
How do you know what it's telling you is meaningful to what you're looking for?
Yeah.
And I mean, how do you go through that whole assessment tool process and make it give you information that would help you further that path along about knowing yourself better?
That's a great question. Mm-hmm. And it is a bloody mess out there with assessments, isn't it? A what? A plethora. Yeah, there's a million of them. And by the way, when you do the kind of work that Jeanie and I do, it gets even worse, because suddenly you have to pick out of the 500 assessments that are out there, which tools do you want to use?
Right.
So then it's totally overwhelming. And we have all the time that we would care to spend looking at them, and you guys don't want to do that. So I would say this about assessments. So first, to answer your question, I think that, no, actually I'm not going to answer your question. Maybe I will in a minute. Let me say this about assessments. Assessments are just a little piece of the picture. Assessments are like a camera taking a photo of you in a particular way. And every single assessment takes that photo in a different way. And if you took enough assessments, you would eventually get a real three-dimensional picture of who you are on the inside, or like who you are in terms of your behaviors. You'd have to do a bunch of them, because they're all a little bit different. And the problem with assessments is that people sometimes invest too much meaning into them, and they start thinking that they actually convey the truth about you, when in fact no assessment really does that. Assessments are wonderful tools to get you to see something about yourself, but then they fall off a cliff in that they never define you. So that's I just want to say that's what I see as the strengths and the limits of assessments. Do you have a thought about how to pick one?
Yeah, I haven't thought about them too, which I think mirrors yours, which
Please.
is I would refrain from picking an assessment as you're doing self-exploration. And I would lean into a couple of other things. One is I would find a partner, whoever that may be. It may be a buddy, it may be your wife or your spouse, maybe anybody else, a former teacher, a former colleague. And I'd ask that person to partner with you in asking you some of the fundamental questions that assessments ask. What kinds of things are you interested in? Where have you demonstrated this kind of skill? In that kind of interaction, you have the discipline and kind of you have to be honest because you've got that other person there asking you the questions, and it helps sort of prompt the ideas from you. So it's a more valuable experience. And to that end, I think another really great exercise is to go back again to your peak experiences, both good and bad. And when you think about your peak experiences, what were you doing? And really think about all the things that you were doing in that experience, who you were talking to, what skills you were using, who you're working with, what was the project content. Another person who I spoke to recently did this exercise and came to this wonderful revelation that, in fact, they were really good at a few things and that they wanted to do more of it, and that was really all the assessment that they needed. And the 3 or 4 things that they were really good at were, 1, joining a group that already had a few ideas and building on those ideas and then synthesizing them, and then helping them get to a strategy and then leading the strategy, especially in the negotiation. And so with that clarity, they were able to move forward much more effectively. And it came through sort of this internal assessment that they did through looking at those peak experiences.
What she said. As far as picking an assessment,
Rebecca,
can I just add on a little bit before we?
Yeah.
What I was going to add was another exercise that you can do is, and it's a very simple one, and it's a self-assessment, and that is an exercise my coach at one point used on me when I was an executive, and it was satisfiers and dissatisfiers. You just create a document with 2 columns, and on one column, what are the things that make me happier? And on the other column, what are the things, I mean, it's really basic. What are the things that make me less satisfied? And once a day or once a week, pull it up and look over the last day or look over the last week and ask yourself, and the key is what Jeanie said, which is be very granular about it. You know, it was this interaction one-on-one with this person where I was talking about X. You want to be as specific and granular as possible when you're capturing those things. But as you do that, what you're doing is kind of a broad self-assessment about what's going to make you happy. And in a way, I think a simple assessment like that can be just really valuable.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yes.
Great.
Hi, I just had a question about cultural fit, which seems to be kind of a catch-all phrase for employers to say yes or no. So as Berkeley MBAs, we're all qualified to do many things, and I mean, this might relate to what you were talking about earlier, but when you get to the final rounds of an interview and then maybe you're not the right cultural fit, even if it's the job that you want or you know yourself really well, how can you get feedback or figure out, like, if you are a cultural fit, and how can you convince the employer that you are?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. I could take a stab at that.
Go ahead.
And if anybody else in the audience has thoughts on this, because it is a tough one. And so I have 2 kind of perspectives. One is sometimes you get to the end of an interview process and there were 3 really strong candidates and they really like you, but they can't pick you, but they can't really tell you why, because that's not what they do. So they say cultural fit because that's kind of an easier way to let you know that you're not selected.
It's a phrase that has been run by the legal department
Right.
and passed.
Right. So that's one perspective, and certainly now, and I think from my vantage point in probably years in the job market for the past 4 years, it's been so competitive that most employers are in the catbird seat, and they have 2 or 3 candidates that they would love to have any of them. And and it's really more about whether one matches the job description to a T, or one's missing that one box they couldn't check, so they're not the cultural fit. So that's my first answer, I guess. The second answer would be the best way to ensure that it is the right cultural fit for you is to do as much research as you can about the company. So that means reading about them online. You can defer, not defer, but you can ascertain a lot about the culture from their website and how they present themselves and anything else that's written about them, and then talking to people there. And that means anybody and everybody that you can possibly find. And that's really the best way for you to actually say, is this the right culture for me to be successful in? Because if you're convinced it's the right culture, then your work is done. Because that knowing will come across in the way that you present yourself in the interview.
Yeah, my add to that would be, and they may not answer. You may ask, and they may be totally stuck in not answering. But always ask the question, oh, cultural fit. Can you tell me a little more about what you mean by that? Oh, I wasn't a cultural fit. Were there some particular areas? Because that's another place that you can gather intelligence about both yourself and the company. Because who knows, you may be interviewing at that same company in 2 months later. You never know. So use the whole interview process as another place to gather intelligence about yourself and the company. Ask those questions. Always do it in a respectful, polite way. Always be genial if they say, I'm sorry, we have legal issues, we can't tell you. Fine. But always ask, because sometimes they will share information with you, and that can be very, very useful information.
And I think that's a really good point, that you might actually, they may call you 2 months down the road and say, the person we selected didn't work out, or we have another position that we are thinking about for you because of the experience we had interviewing you. I can't tell you how many people I've met that have had that experience. So it is really important to stay engaged and to really engage as if you are working there in all the interactions that you have while you're interviewing. Let them know that you're actively engaged in a partner and a problem solver even before they even go to the third or fourth interview. So now maybe we should change course a little bit and
Sure.
talk about the other kind of key area around being successful and fulfilled, which is around building relationships.
Great. So here's a question. I can't even get an interview in front of a live person for the job opportunities in a new field. What do I do?
Right. So this is a challenge. Can't get an interview in a new field, in your own field. What do you do? So this prompts another question that Eric and I talked about asking you, which is a little bit sort of provocative, but we'll throw it out. There's no right answer to this question. So if you are outside of a castle, and the castle is surrounded by a moat full of alligators,
Crocodiles.
and there's no bridges available, how do you get into the castle? So who has some ideas about how to get into the castle? What?
Build a passage.
Build a passage. Have a friend inside. Catapult your way in. How else? Any other creative ideas?
I'm a tunnel digger myself. Dig down.
Rapunzel's in the castle. Okay, so all great ideas, all right, but in a career dilemma, maybe knowing somebody on the inside and making a connection there is easier than catapulting, unless, of course, you're a catapulting expert, and that's going to get you on top and inside much quicker than figuring out who's inside. But the first challenge around getting into the castle is who's inside, and how do I find out who's inside, and how do I connect with that person inside? And once you do connect with them, how do you make yourself compelling to them? And so the key thing there is to think about the other person and what they might need. So it's knowing who's inside and then figuring out what you can learn about them and also what you can do for them. And as you think about doing something for someone else, it gives them the motivation to talk with you. So this is sort of the fundamental concept of networking, which some people think of as a slimy word, but really what it's about is building relationships.
Okay, quick poll. Networking, is it a slimy word? Raise your hand if yes.
Good, okay.
No, good, okay. Very enlightened audience.
Yes. So
actually, this is a self-selected audience because they came to this event.
That's right.
They're
That's
like,
right.
they're all going to talk to each other and trade cards right after our talk here. So.
That's right. So that's good. So you already are ahead, right? You've already been building and cultivating a strong network from the beginning, from the time that you graduated from college. And you're cultivating, meaning you're keeping it up and you're checking in with people and you're asking them what you can do for them and you're making sure they know what you're up to, right? All of those things are going on. But those things are really, really important. And the lesson here is you want to make sure that you build your relationships and your network from the start. And you don't start doing it when, oops, you need something from someone else. And then it becomes this kind of awkward dynamic of, we haven't talked in 20 years, but I noticed that there's a really interesting opportunity at your firm. So building your network is really important. And there's two principles that are part of that I wanted to just note. One is, it's great to think about all of your networks in this way. And you probably are all part of a shared activities network, which is like a poker night or a weekend tennis game. And oftentimes you have no idea what the people in those groups even do for a living, because all you talk about is tennis or poker. But that's a wonderful opportunity for you to broaden your reach and to really expand your own network and to potentially increase the number of opportunities that you might have before you. The other opportunity you have is that you probably all have somebody in your network who Brian Uzi and Shannon Dunlap from Northwestern, who've done some research on networking, would call information brokers. These are the people that you know who you talk about and say, God, they know everyone. They're connected to everyone. Well, those people are really important for you, especially if you're in transition, because they are connected to everyone and they're extremely useful. And they're people that are great to be in a relationship with. And you yourselves may be even those kinds of people. But the beauty of it all is that if you really engage in this way, the whole relationship building takes on an even more fun dimension, because it is really about enjoying, learning about people, doing for others, and then having the wonderful experience of getting that back.
Yeah, I have a colleague who says when she, hold that thought for a second, when she goes to any kind of a networking opportunity, the thought that she goes in with is, who in this room can I help? And it's not a fake thing. It's not like, oh, who can I help so that, blah, blah, blah. It's really, who can I help? And I think if any of you, or if you know anyone who is more shy about the idea of introducing yourself to someone, you're in a big group of people and, how can I just walk up to people and chat with them? I think that's a great way to frame it in your mind. Because the reality is, if your goal is to be of service in the world, really the only way to do that is through your relationships with people. So you have to establish a relationship with someone in order to help them. And so I thought that was a very powerful way of framing it. And it really, especially for people who feel like, gee, networking is slimy, I'm trying to get something from people and I'm bothering them and I'm wasting their time. If you reframe it as a service opportunity, it's huge change, and it really can change your energy and your engagement in that activity. And I promised that you could talk.
Yeah, I'm out job hunting, and I've recently engaged in networking, but I have trouble with the specifics when I'm the one who's on the outside looking in of what it is exactly I have to offer to that person. And sometimes it comes up in a conversation, and you can fulfill a request, and that's fine. But I've also been, I'm going to use the word victimized by people who come up to me in a networking event and say, oh, I have some leads for you. And then it turns out they don't, okay, because they're making a false promise or something, and then, of course, they're off my list, right, as a networking opportunity. But do you have some suggestions for this sort of issue?
Well, I have a suggestion for the first part of your question, which is I think an attitude to take is an attitude of curiosity about the other person, because you may not know. I mean, you could certainly go back and start doing an inventory of the sorts of strengths that you have and the sorts of things that you have to offer, and maybe that would be useful. But I think really where it's going to connect up for you is when you're curious about the other person and you're just trying to learn more about them. You just want to know, what are they up to, and who do they know? What are they looking for? What do they care about? Because again, it's in that relationship. It's in the relationship that you can help each other. So you have to first really focus on that and trust that you will have something to give them. And you may not know what it's going to be when you start the conversation until they give you something that triggers in you, oh, I do know something about that, or I do know someone. So everybody in this room has an incredible resource of who they are and their own network and their talents and their background. Everyone has something to offer. You may not know till you're talking to them.
Yeah, and I have an anecdote and then a little trick that I like to use for this that may work for some, maybe not everybody, but I think of everybody's a client and how can I serve them? So as I'm listening to their story, I'm actually thinking about, wow, they've told me a couple of problems. What can I do? How can I help them solve their problem? Maybe there's an article that I have at home that I could send them that would really kind of reinforce my desire to contribute. And the anecdote, I think, just reinforces what Eric said, is that there was an executive search consultant who was talking about how amazing it was to have somebody reach out to them and say, you know, I'm interested in this position you have listed, and have the person, you know, and have them appreciate that not only are they talking to a possible candidate, but this person is actually sharing all sorts of things about the market that the search consultant can't see because they're inside their office and they don't have the same vantage point. So that really, I think, shines a light on the opportunity that everyone has, is that you come from different places and your experience is valuable to the person that you're talking to because it's a different experience and you see different things and it helps them be more competitive or more informed.
To your second half of your question, when people come up to you and they offer you like wonderful things, when you do enough networking, you can smell that something is wrong, right? I mean, and maybe I'm making this too simplistic, but if it feels like something's being sold to you, then it probably is. And you know, just ignore them. Don't worry about it.
So we have sort of another question, kind of a real fundamental question around opportunities. How do you create opportunities where you don't see any existing?
Right. And I was going to throw this out and ask if the person who submitted that question in advance is here. I know I'm putting you on the spot. You don't have to raise your hand. But if you're willing, I'd love to know what you mean by this question. Are you talking about how do you create an opportunity within the company that you're already in? How do you be more entrepreneurial, innovative? Was it you? Okay, so what's the scoop? Was this a question about inside the company, or do you want to go start a small business, or what are we talking about here?
Just the fact that you start working and you realize you can do more than you are doing.
Yeah.
How do you present yourself properly to the leadership that they will recognize your abilities and they will use what you can do to the good of the company and shareholders?
Okay, that's a different question than I thought it was going to be. But it's a great question. I think there are a couple pieces to this, and I'll start, and maybe you'll have an ad. I think, again, this is a strategic communication kind of question. So anytime that you have something important that you want to influence, and you're getting ready for, this is going to come down to probably a series of conversations, but you have something else to say.
Right. You try to present a strategy and someone tells you, you know, that's not really your job. But you know that strategy is going to have a big positive impact on the project you're working on. So how do you cross that?
Yeah. Okay. So I have two thoughts on that. One is anytime that you are going into a conversation like that where you're raising something that you want to do, the higher the stakes are for that conversation, the more time you need to spend in advance preparing for the conversation. That's just a rule of thumb. So if you've got a 1-hour meeting and something like that is at stake, you need to spend like 2 or 3 hours in advance figuring out exactly what your key messages are, how you're going to present it, the questions you want to ask them. So the higher the stakes, the bigger the preparation. I've worked on projects where it's a half day of presentations and the company spends 5 months preparing for it. So that's a high stakes presentation. I mean, maybe you do that already, but that's just for the group. That's a principle you want to follow. And The other thing has to do with how well you have done your intelligence gathering for that conversation. In other words, you want to make it as easy as possible for them to say yes. So you want to go in there with a specific plan, a very specific plan, that's based on information that you've gathered by talking to all of the right people, and that is a low-risk plan for them. And by low risk, I mean something like this. Okay, this is going to take about 10% of my time to do this. So that means that this other 10% of stuff is going to need to stop happening. Here's how I propose that we deal with that. This can be farmed out to this person. This is not very important. We can just drop it. And here's the benefit that you're going to see by making this change. So I think this is all about intelligence gathering and strategic and communication strategy, how you prepare for it.
Mm-hmm. And I'd say the one thing to focus on in your intelligence gathering is, what are the objections? Why aren't they going to want to do this? And what are the factual objections, and what are the emotional objections, and what are the cultural? And then, who do I need to enlist?
You've got all those.
Who do I need to enlist? If I'm part of the objection, who can I enlist to help me in this process?
Well,
It's more of a...
I'm trying to contribute more than they're expecting from me.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So
But then-
they're idiots. I mean,
Right.
they're idiots. You're trying to give them this great thing, and they can't. But your job is to communicate in a way that they see that they're idiots.
Right.
I mean, no, that's not what I mean. Let me rephrase that.
Maybe do the opposite.
Your job is to get them to see how obvious it is that they need to do what you're proposing in a way, and how good they will look.
Right.
Yeah, well, how good it is for and that what you're proposing fits into the bigger strategy for the organization. It's not just something you want to do because you want to get ahead. This is better for them, and it's better for the company. And frame it that way. Be careful.
Then the recommendation is more conversations.
Yeah.
More conversations.
Yeah, go slow.
Yeah.
Go slow.
Yeah.
Thanks for saying that.
What about other people in maybe different situations where you feel like, in this particular situation, I don't see any opportunities and I'm stuck? Does anybody else have anecdote or experience with that sort of frustration and how to overcome it?
Well, I haven't, but I don't think I've overcome it.
Ah,
Okay. Let's hear it.
I recently had a meeting with my manager, and he came from a different company, and he's got a different philosophy, and he's been very, very open to what I'm dealing with. It has to do with job fulfillment and capabilities, very, very similar to other comments here. But I work in a large organization, and he was sharing that the reason you're not getting the recognition or the advancement is not because of you per se. They all think you do a great job. It's just that you're in a job function that only allows you to impact the company so much. Mm-hmm. But I'm in the midst of this discussion, so I don't have any kind of resolution. But I appreciate that, because I've had other managers in previous roles where I would say they had other priorities, where my function in the company, I'm not going to be specific here, was I did something very, very important, but the way the company was structured, it really benefited two other major organizations. And the feedback went at the senior executive level, very, very high in the company, and it was great. But as far as our senior VP, what I did was somewhat tangential to what he wanted to do. Mm-hmm. So even though I had a great ride, if you will, for a while, and great accomplishments, I felt like, gee, I didn't get recognized, I'm not being fulfilled, and it has to do with the way the company views the job position.
Right. So the opportunity may be to ask, what do I need to do to be considered?
For what?
For movement up into a different role.
I think the initial conversation will be that maybe you need to do something different. What's important to you, much like we talked about here earlier, but I think this particular manager is very open to say, look, if you decide not to leave the group and you're a great contributor, I'm okay with that, because I'm helping you grow and helping you develop. I'm going to start a discussion. So there's possibilities that I can move into a different function within the company, a different function possibly within the organization. So that's just where I'm at right now.
Right. So it sounds like you do see some opportunities. It's just a question of which one.
I think it's too early to say there's possible opportunities. Obviously, I'm not going to share with him, but I'm sure it's implicit that I'll be looking outside the company as well.
Yeah, I think as a matter of mindset, never believe someone who tells you that the job you're in is actually the big obstacle. I mean, it may be an obstacle. It may be an obstacle. But never believe that completely. Because as soon as you believe that, then it's over. Game over. You have to leave the job, right? So the question, I think a better question is, what sort of possibilities can I be open to right now where I am? I mean, if you decide you want to stick around.
For this particular job that I'm currently in.
Yeah, for this particular job. If you decide you want to stay in that job for a while or whatever, what are the possibilities that I'm not seeing and that my boss is not seeing that this job could become or could change into? Or how can I reach out here with 20% of my time to do this other innovative thing? I think never believe when somebody tells you, oh, you're limited and there's nothing that can be done about it. I mean, which is kind of what I think you're being told.
I think, well, you don't have enough information, but one
Okay,
thing
fair
would be that
enough.
this relatively new job that it's only been in existence for about a year, and my message to him twice, and this involves some of the other comments here, I happen to think that the job hasn't been as effective because the management tie-ins, first level and second level above where I'm at, haven't fostered the right amount of team cooperation. I think his view is his perspective because he came from a company that was acquired. And, that company, I came from a company that was acquired too. So he's giving me his opinion. So it may not be the fact, I understand that.
Yeah.
But at the same time, given the fact that this job role that I'm in is relatively new, I have other influential networking peers who've said, wait till next year.
Right.
So I go to them more for insight, not that I'm relying totally on my manager.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is another good reinforcement of using your internal network for that kind of advisory intelligence.
Right.
Good.
Can I move us to another
Yeah.
question?
Let's.
How do I handle the challenge of being over 50 in job search?
Great question. I love this question. Okay, so I'm going to start the question with just a reference to someone that you probably all are familiar with, Mike Wallace, who sadly died last couple of weeks. One of the things that I did not know about him was that he actually changed his career when he was over 50, or just at 50. And he changed it for a very specific reason, which hopefully no one will have to go through because it was a very tragic personal thing. He lost his son, and that tragic event really made him sort of look at his career and take stock and evaluate whether or not he wanted to continue doing what he was doing. And what he was doing primarily was the soft side of TV entertainment. He was doing a lot of TV commercials and radio spots and light news. So he decided he really wanted to get serious about news and moved into more of this format that ultimately became 60 Minutes, and the rest is history. So the point of that story is really just to reinforce that age doesn't matter. It's a matter of mindset. And the challenge, the practical challenge that you encounter in the marketplace is bias. And how do you overcome the bias? So there's probably many biases, but the three that I think stand out to me are, one, you're just not going to keep up. You're going to be too slow because you're old. And, everyone knows if you're older, you're slow. So the opportunity for you there is to actually demonstrate how that's not the case. And you can demonstrate it in so many ways. You can point to the dynamic career you have had and the pattern. You can demonstrate it by the way you are in the interview and how enthusiastic you are, the way you follow up, the way you engage in conversation, the way that you demonstrate the resourcefulness that you have for possible solutions that you suggest in an interview, and so on. So the opportunity for you is to disabuse them of that bias. The second bias is you're not current. How can you possibly be current? Because you're not from the social media generation. You haven't grown up with Twitter and Facebook. Well, the way, again, to disabuse people of that is to demonstrate that you are current, You don't have to get enmeshed in social media to be current, but you certainly have to be aware of it and ideally use it to a certain extent. And share that you use it, talk about it, put it on your resume, have a LinkedIn account, maybe have a Facebook account. It doesn't mean that you have to go crazy with it, but it is an important thing to demonstrate. Technology savvy is also really important, especially here in the Bay Area. Reading the paper and just reading those technology articles, it's important, and you can weave that into conversations that you have with people and into interviews. The other big final bias that I'll note is that people think you're a short timer. You know, well, this is maybe your last hurrah, you know, and you're out. And, you know, that could be further from the truth. And the good news is I talked to somebody just within the last week who said they're actually looking for people specifically who have a core set of experiences and expertise, who are over 50, because they know that their kids are gone, they're not going to be distracted by other things, and that they have the interest in that capacity to really invest in their careers. So like, this is like the best thing ever. It's sort of like the 20-year-old who doesn't have the attachments, but with all that experience and wisdom. So, in fact, so I guess that my encouragement with people is always to turn it into a positive and turn it into a strength. It's your asset, and your challenge is really just to get over those 3 obstacles and to assess if there's any others and disabuse them of those.
Marshall Goldsmith is a nationally known executive coach and kind of a character, and I saw him speak with a small group of people once, and he said, nobody asked him, he said, you know, people always ask me, when am I going to retire? And I think he's in his late 60s or something. When are you going to retire? And I tell them, dead. When I'm dead, I'm never going to retire until I'm dead. You know, they're going to have to pull me out on a stretcher. And what I appreciated about that, well, that is true for him. I think he wants to work, you know, until he's dead. What I appreciated about that was he took the initiative to proactively put this message out to the world so people know how to view him. He didn't leave that in their hands. He shaped their perception of him proactively. And I think that's something that you can do, you know, and I think Jeannie's strategies are exactly the right ones. You know, it's how you talk about your future, it's how you talk about your currency, your familiarity with technology and everything else.
Now, we had another question that relates to sort of this period in your life, a more sort of politically challenging question. And that is, if you're a leader in a firm at this point, and you have a lot of experience under your belt, you may be the president and the CEO, and you have a challenge with your board. You and your board don't see eye to eye. You and your board have actually concluded that you feel very differently about the vision for the company potentially. What do you do in that situation?
Yeah, and I think to broaden that question, it could be a question about anyone who's right in that spot where they're thinking, maybe I got to leave now. You know, things are really bad, there's a conflict, and there's a leadership team, and maybe you're part of it or whatever. So the question is, what do you do when you're in the thick of that? And obviously, it's going to depend on the particulars, and I can't give a universal answer, but generally, here is as close to a universal answer as I could come. I would suggest, when you've reached that point, go and have one-on-one conversations with all the key stakeholders, and not in the office. You know, take them out to dinner, go and have coffee, you know, let your hair down a little bit, and really talk. You know, dig in and really talk. And here's the other critical part of that. Take the time to prepare for those conversations. Either do it yourself or even, you know, work with someone or have a colleague or a coach or someone help you. But invest the time to prepare for those conversations. Because regardless of which way you go, if you decide you're going to stay and you want to try to influence the outcome, or you're going to go because it's just impossible, you want to keep those relationships intact because you're going to need them. You know, if you're CEO and you're on the outs with the board, you know, guess who's going to help you find your next CEO job? It may be a board member. So don't let a difference in strategy or philosophy cause a problem, a permanent problem in your relationship. Slow down and spend time one-on-one would be my suggestion.
Josh, did you have a question?
Question. It's on. So I found both from personal experience as well as other colleagues know that a great way to help advance in your company and move up is to get an offer from another company, and they realize that they might be
but be careful.
So,
Yeah.
but you might find yourself in a situation where they take you for granted to a certain extent.
Yeah.
Think they're doing great, they'll be happy there forever. Why do I have to do anything to move them? Well, sometimes it's the only way to send the message. Now, I'm wondering if you have advice so you don't have to go out and interview outside in order to send the message, hey, I want to keep advancing. I'm doing well, and you already know that, but I'm not going to sit here forever waiting for it either. But hopefully without having to actually go out and show them that, yes, I can get another job, and I will leave if you don't give this to me.
Yeah.
That's a great question.
It is.
And it comes up a lot, and I think Eric and I can tell from your reaction, we probably have the same point of view on this. So first, the data. Just the data, anecdotally, is that probably 80% of people who go in with another opportunity and are persuaded to stay are gone within 6 months. So it's a little bit like, I want to divorce you. Oh, you're going to change your behavior. Okay, I guess we'll stay together.
I want to divorce you. Look, this other attractive person is willing to date me.
Yeah.
So now let's talk.
Right. So it's tricky. It's a tricky thing, and it's not. And the challenge is that it makes managing all the relationships much harder. So what to do then, short of that? And it's a great question, and I have a few thoughts, and then and the thoughts that I have actually come from a conversation someone had recently. So again, as Eric was saying, think about what you do want them to value, what you want them to acknowledge, and think about what you may want to show them to get that kind of feedback. And it may be that you have a conversation with your boss and potentially boss's boss to review some of the accomplishments that you've had, to ask for feedback, and then to push them around specific areas that you would like to grow. So it does become your job to identify, I'd like to go over here. You want to come with a solution, even if it's a solution that may not be realistic, because that may prompt them to give you an alternative solution. So rather than saying, I want to be promoted into this role so that I can do X. I've demonstrated the capacity. What else is it going to take? At that point, you're giving them a lot of information, and they can then come back to you with, it'll take X, Y, Z, time, performance, and so on. But having that frank conversation that really is specific about your future is what is going to give you the information around whether you need to look out or not. Because if there's receptivity there and a willingness to work with you, you can clearly proceed internally. But if you are shut down there, it's more evidence that going outside is probably your best option.
Yeah, and I think, and not knowing the details of your situation, generally I would say, make sure that you're really listening. Make sure that you're really listening to the feedback that you're getting from your boss and from the people around you, and ask for feedback. Ask for it. Because what often happens is somebody in, I'm going to use you as an example, even though I don't know that this is true for you at all, okay? But let's say you're in a role and you think that you're doing a great job, and some of your peers think you're doing a great job, and there are two big concerns about you maybe that the next level up has, right? And you think that those concerns are a bunch of crap. But that doesn't matter because they think that it's important. So I think one of the critical things is to find out, to really hear what the people around you, and especially at the next layer up, how they see you and what they think needs to change for you in order for you to move. And then make those changes. Take that on. And if you really disagree and think, you know what, I really disagree, I don't think those are changes that I need to make because they see me incorrectly or their priorities are wrong, then I think it's time to think about whether you need to leave.
Does that answer your question?
I think they're good points of advice. I could talk to you afterwards. It's a different situation where those things had happened, had already great feedback, whatnot. It was a matter of them really going out of their way to find a way to make, an appropriate position even available. We're already getting open and positive feedback.
Great.
And already communicating the desires there, but but there's nothing open.
Right.
Oh, but there's nothing open. And then magically, when you have another offer in your hand, I've found a way to make something open.
So how do you turn
That's
up the
funny.
fire
So,
underneath them to
yeah,
motivate them
exactly.
to do that? Yeah.
Right. It was not a question that,
It's not a question of you doing a great job.
But
or
they were
anything.
saying that there was nothing open, nothing open, nothing open. Oh, you have another offer? Okay, here's something open.
Well, your career, my goals are X, and I'm all about achieving those goals. So I want to achieve them here, and I'd like to find a way. So it's kind of dancing right up to that line without saying that you're out if it doesn't happen. But these are my goals. They're pretty specific. I'd like to achieve them here. What can we do about it?
And I'm willing to work very hard on my
Right.
side of things to to help find a way to make that possible. But I think that was said very well.
We
You walked
only
right up to
have
that line.
we only have a few more short minutes, and I know that we're bumping up against lunch. So let's take some questions, and then
And then
go
we'll be
from there.
done.
And then we'll be done. Yes.
So I have a question which is coming from a slightly different angle. What happens if you're a manager and you actually have an opportunity to hire somebody that's more experienced and better than you? So 2 questions to that. How would you evaluate such an opportunity? And secondly, how would you evaluate the effect to your own career?
So let me make sure I understand your question. Your question is you have a candidate that you could hire who's a superstar and probably better than you are, just from an objective point of view. What are the pros and cons of hiring that person? Yeah.
So
Wow. You want to?
yes.
Okay.
Yes. So there's only pros from, again, perspective and experience in this, and it's in a way it's sort of a best practice of leadership. Hire people who are smarter than you. Select people for your team that are smarter than you. So yes, I would say it's a great move, and it's only got a positive for you. Whether it moves you out of a structural slot in the organization may just lead to other opportunities, because what you're doing in the process is creating a better, higher quality experience and product for everybody. So yes, do it.
I also want to say, because I know what company you're in and I won't say what it is, but I also want to say in some companies, the political environment is so extreme, it's so highly charged that everybody is trying to chess play each other. And I would just, you have to pay attention to that. You can't put your head in the sand, but I just would try to not buy into it as much as you can and just look for the good of the company. Hiring somebody who's top talent, you develop a relationship with them, maybe they're going to pass you up, maybe they're going to be 3 levels from where you are in 5 years, but then you've got a great relationship with them, and you can go in their wake. Yeah. We are right exactly at time, so I want to just say thank you so much. This is a real
Thank you.
pleasure.
Thank you.